Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're having a little bit of fun by rewriting the Star Wars franchise. A lot of other content creators have done this, so I figured what the hell, I might as well do it too. I'm not going to touch the prequel trilogy. A lot of people consider it a sacred cow, and I'm just going to leave it as it is and concentrate on the prequel trilogy and the sequel trilogy. And I'm also not going to touch the things like the direction and the cinematography and stuff like that, because that's not what I do. I'm a writer. We're here to talk about the story, and that's how I would change both the prequel trilogy and the sequel trilogy. So let's get started. So the main problem that I see with the prequel trilogy is that in the first movie, The Phantom Menace, it doesn't really have a main character. I think the overall story arc of the prequel trilogy that details Anakin Skywalker's fall to the dark side, I think it's a very good story idea. And that part I would not change. And I think the second two movies did a much better job of following both him and his internal conflict and the process that he went through psychologically in order to become the Sith Lord that he did. The problem is with the first movie, which doesn't do that. First of all, because he's too young and the audience can't really identify with him. I think the actor who played Anakin Skywalker as a boy was either badly miscast or really badly directed, or possibly both. I think, if you compare him with the character of Elliot from E.T. or Daniel Radcliffe in the very first Harry Potter movies, a different actor directed more effectively could have portrayed Anakin's internal conflicts at that stage of the story far better than the actor that we actually saw. The first movie did absolutely nothing to identify Anakin's internal conflicts, either with grappling with the power that he was growing into, leaving his home planet, separating from his mother. All of those internal conflicts were just completely glossed over. And there were way too many characters. The story skips around from one character to another. There is no central point of view character who is that the audience can identify with. The second two movies did a much better job of that. That could have been better, though. And all we have to do is look at the final climactic duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi and work backwards from there to see how the story should have gone. Because in the first movie, there is no main point of view character. Qui-Gon is not that person. Obi-Wan is not that person. Anakin is not that person. Padme is not that person. There's no indication of who the movie is even about. So, in order for the final climactic duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan to actually mean something, they have to have a much better established relationship. And that starts at the very beginning. When Qui-Gon gets the idea that Anakin is some kind of chosen one, who's going to be this incredibly powerful Jedi who's going to defeat the Sith. Way back then, what should have happened was that Obi-Wan should have sensed great darkness in Anakin and had a conflict with Qui-Gon about whether or not Anakin was in fact going to be this great Jedi that Qui-Gon thought he was, or whether training Anakin was even a good idea because of his propensity for the dark side. And at the same time, there could have been a parallel storyline where the development of friendship between Obi-Wan and Anakin works against that tendency in Obi-Wan, so that Obi-Wan has an internal conflict of fearing what Anakin will become, and at the same time trying to coach him through this darkness so that he's able to deal with it and overcome it. And this is something that all Jedi have to do. We've already seen that in the prequel trilogy with Luke and Yoda. When Yoda sensed Luke's tendency to the dark side and trained him to face it and deal with it. And then when Qui-Gon dies, Obi-Wan would have a much stronger motivation to become Anakin's Jedi Master and to take him as an apprentice, to teach him how to deal with this darkness so that he does not become a Sith Lord instead of this great Jedi savior that Qui-Gon thought he was going to be. And all of that following the development of both characters and the interplay and the back and forth of their relationship leading all the way up to that climactic duel would have made it way, way more effective and meaningful. Because the way it is now, when we get to the duel, the emotion that Obi-Wan shows at the betrayal of Anakin turning to the dark side when Qui-Gon thought he was going to be this great Jedi who was going to lead the Jedi Order to defeat the Sith, that betrayal just comes completely out of left field. There's no development or setup for it. There's no foundation for it. So that's how I would rewrite the prequels. And moving on to the sequel trilogy, we have exactly the same problem, where the idea of Luke Skywalker sensing great darkness in Ben Solo and fearing the Sith Lord that he is going to grow into, that is a great idea. That should have been the foundation of the entire series, not all this other stuff. It should have started when Ben became Luke's apprentice, and Luke had this vision that Ben was going to become a Sith Lord and cause great destruction to the rebels. But instead of trying to kill him, what Luke actually would have done, what would have been more in congruence with his character, is that he told Ben about this vision and impressed upon him the way that Yoda impressed upon Luke. You have great darkness in you. The dark is strong in you, and we need to train that so that you have the tools to fight it. And that could have been a conflict not just between the two of them, but internally on both of their sides. On Luke's side, because he wants to fight the darkness. He wants to defeat the part of Ben that is dark. And on Ben's side, not only because he senses that Luke is right and he needs to defeat this darkness within him, but also resentment towards Luke for not only seeing it in him, but to even believe that Ben would become that, even though Ben sees himself going in that direction. So that could have been a very powerful, very close relationship and interaction between the two of them that leads to everything else that happens in the series, where Ben does fall to the dark side and he does become the Sith Lord. And then at the end, the good guys have to go through a process of defeating him, but at the end, they finally get through to him and convince him that there is still good in you. That has to, George Lucas very famously stated that the Star Wars movies are like poetry and that they rhyme throughout throughout the series. And that did not happen. That did not play out. But in this rewriting that I'm telling you right now, that's what would have happened. It would have happened in the prequel trilogy, when Obi-Wan Kenobi is trying to convince Anakin, there is good in you. You don't have to be like this. And then in the original trilogy, it happens between Luke and Vader. And then in the final climax of the battle of the good guys against Kylo Ren after he turns to the dark, it can happen there too, where Luke and Han and Leia finally convince Kylo, there is good in you, and we can save you if you turn back to the light. He didn't have to die. He could have become, he could have been the greatest antagonist, far greater than bringing back Palpatine from the dead, which is just silly. He could have been the antagonist as well as gone through a redemption arc. And this exactly the same thing could have happened if the character of Luke's apprentice was a female. I know that the writers and the directors and the producers created the character of Rey because they wanted a female protagonist. They wanted to make a political statement. And it is always a bad idea. From a point of view of writing craft, it's always a bad idea to make craft decisions for purely political reasons. If there's no craft reason to make a decision about whether a character should be male or female, it's an incredibly bad idea to make that decision only for political motives. And it makes a lot more sense for that character to be a male, because it's a mirror. It's a retelling of the dynamic between Luke and Yoda and Obi-Wan and Anakin, playing out again between Luke and Ben Solo, who is his nephew. And it would have made a lot more sense at the end of the sequel trilogy if Ben started calling himself Skywalker, because he is a Skywalker. He's the last Skywalker. There could even be a romantic subplot between a Rey-type character who is one of Luke's apprentices. It makes zero sense that Luke would only train his own nephew and not have some other apprentices. If he's the last Jedi, then it would be incumbent upon him to train up more apprentices to rebuild the Jedi Order. He would have had other apprentices, some of whom would be female. You could still have a Rey character with a romantic subplot with Ben Solo, where he turns against her to go to the dark side, and she is one of those who is involved with Luke and Han and Leia at the end to convince Ben to turn back to the light. You could still have all of that, but with Ben being the main character. So that's what I would have done with the series. I think the idea of this dynamic between Luke and Ben is extremely powerful. And it's far more reminiscent of the other master-apprentice relationships that are going on in the other two trilogies. And in order to tie all three trilogies together, there does need to be these common elements where, the lesson that we learn at the end of Return of the Jedi, when Luke finally convinces Vader, there is good in you. You don't have to be like this. You don't have to do what he tells you to. you know, you can still do the right thing. And then Vader is redeemed when he saves Luke. That's the message at the end of Return of the Jedi, and that could have been the message that carried through the entire franchise. In the prequels, we see Anakin falling to the dark side, and then in the sequel trilogy, at the end of the sequel trilogy, we get the same message when Kylo turns back to the light and rejoins his parents and his uncle and the woman he loves and doing the right thing. And either he lives and rejoins the Jedi, or he sacrifices himself to save all of them. So that's just a little bit of fun for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.